afternoon presentation. And those that are watching online, welcome back to West Croydon. And this afternoon we have an excellent presentation on diet and cancer myths. And this will be presented by Natalie Harris, who is a member of the Croydon Seventh-day Adventist Church, and she is a dietitian in a cancer hospital, if I have got that right. So welcome, Sister Natalie, to West Croydon, just down the road from Croydon. And those of you who are watching online and those of you in the congregation, if you have any questions, then you can raise them at particular points. And Natalie will stop at various points to ask for questions. So listen attentively, note down your questions that you can present them to her. But before I hand over to Natalie, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Dear, kind and eternal Heavenly Father, glory and honor to your high and holy name. We thank you, O Lord, for the blessing of this day, this Sabbath day. And as we go into this afternoon's presentation, we ask that your Spirit will be with us and that our understanding will be opened and that we may learn of you and learn how to look after our bodies. And so, Father, we pray that everything that is done here this afternoon will be pleasing to you. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, yeah, you can use this.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. As Pastor said, I'm a dietitian. I work in a hospital that deals exclusively with treating and caring for people who have a cancer diagnosis, and I've been doing that for over 20 years. So most of my time is spent talking to people one-on-one, so it's always a bit intimidating when you've got a big room, so bear with me and give me lots of smiles and encouragement. So what I thought I would do today is just have a talk with you about some of the enduring kind of dietary cancer myths that come along. So some of the things that some patients say to me when they speak to me, either on the wards, if I'm seeing them on the wards, or in clinic. Should I be doing this? What's the best diet for cancer? And sometimes they've been given information by well-meaning friends and relatives, some of which can be helpful and some of which can not be helpful. So I think, you know, even if you don't have a diagnosis of cancer, if you know people who do, and I think most of us do, it's always good to be clued up so that you can help to support them. So, let's see if I can. Okay. So one of the first things that I thought I would look at or talk about is really whether diet can indeed prevent cancer. The question that's often asked, can it cure cancer? And then we'll go into what are the common questions that people ask me about or that are asked about in the general population. And in terms of can diet prevent cancer, yes, it absolutely can. Up to 40% of cancers are associated with diet and lifestyle, and making positive changes to those can absolutely help to reduce your risk of getting cancer, particularly things like breast cancer, cancer of the digestive system, and cancer of the prostate, which probably all grouped together will form the bulk of the cancers that people will get. So the good news is that you can actually do a lot of really positive things to prevent cancer. But when it comes to whether diet can cure cancer, actually it's also as resounding, and the answer to that is no. So here in the UK, it's actually illegal for anyone to claim that they can cure cancer with diet, because we know that actually that is not possible. But what it can do is help to support people who are going through cancer treatment. It's a really vital part of that, and it can also help to prevent cancer coming back once you've been treated and cured, so that you don't get it coming back again or get a different cancer. So it still is important, even though we know that it's not a cure. So anything that you see on a website or that comes through maybe in your WhatsApp groups that says eat or drink this because it can cure cancer or can melt cancer cells away, that is a lie. So if that helps, that kind of gives you a kind of baseline to go from. And there are lots of myths that kind of circulate on the internet and lots of enduring things that keep coming round, we find as cancer professionals. So I thought I'd base this talk on some of those. And it's really important to realise that, you know, we eat food and we drink every day, and we think that, you know, there's very few things actually that are really harmful, and that's true. Most of the times, even if you eat what we feel is a really poor diet, it can take up to 20 or 30 years for it to have its ill effect on you. But there are some things which are deadly and should, so therefore you need to be cautious. So say, for example, there is a product out there which is often marketed as something called B17, because back in the days when we were learning about different vitamins, it was thought that it was a vitamin, but actually it contains cyanide and it's deadly. So it's found in apricot kernels, and when I first started working, it was one of the times it was going around in the cycle of being very popular, and lots of patients would come to me and they'd say, oh, I'm eating, you know, lots of apricot kernels because I know that it's got a compound in it that can kill cancer, but actually the cyanide in it is very dangerous and actually ended up being fatal to a few patients. So from that perspective, we get people to limit their intake, but it's just kind of an advisory that not everything that's in food and that's natural is safe. So actually you need to kind of do good research when you look into things and just make sure that you keep yourself and your loved ones safe. So, okay. Oh no, we've gone back. I'll try and keep going forwards. So when you look at things, or people kind of say things to you when either you've got cancer or you know someone who has it, and you're maybe trying to give them some support and advice, these are a lot of the things that the things that you read either on the internet or in books, or that you might listen to YouTube videos about. These are some of the things that they claim, and beside them I've put some of the technical terms that you might read if you look into something that's slightly more scientific, but also because sometimes they will slip those terms in there to kind of lend a lot of weight to what they're saying. So actually, if you know what they mean, you don't just get blinded by the words, and even sometimes I have to Google the words that I see sometimes that people have put in there and think, what does it actually mean? So if you hear things like, this type of food will cause the cancer to grow, they're talking about proliferation, or if they say it causes apoptosis, that means that it kills the cancer. And what that means is that all cells in your body have a certain life cycle, a time that they kind of are born, for want of a better word, grow and maybe divide and then die. But with cancer cells, they find a way to evade that natural cycle and keep going, even though they are faulty and causing problems. So a lot of the cancer treatments are really designed to induce what we call apoptosis and the cancer cells dying. So that's a really key one to listen. And actually, when it comes to cancer treatments, that's really true. What we're trying to do is cut off often the blood supply that fuels the cancers and helps them to keep growing. So if something says it can induce hypoxia, then yes, you know, as scientists we get really excited, but you just need to make sure when you're looking at your material that you actually cut off all of that blood supply, would you still be functioning, for want of a better word. So one of the first things I thought I would talk about is dairy, and I just listed some common things that covers. So if you look at it in the scientific literature, we'll be talking about things like this, and certainly the second one down, kefir, seems to be really popular at the moment because it's fermented and contains bacteria that are healthy for the gut. So lots of people are drinking a lot of kefir. It doesn't include eggs, even though this sometimes mistakenly gets grouped together with dairy products. You're thinking about things that come from the cow, so things that are made with milk. Actually, not necessarily just the cow, but it might also be things like sheep and goats. And so these are some of the claims against dairy. So probably about 15 years or so, a lady called Professor Jane Plant, she she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she did a lot of work on the intake of alcohol as a population. We know that's something that drives breast cancer risk. They had an earlier age of pregnancy, so they tended to have their children younger, and actually that was also protective. And they had much lower rates of obesity, and that's another thing that's also really protective. And so she kind of came from a bit of a flawed premise. She also, some of the things that she said about them containing hormones that kind of drove the risk of breast cancer or the changes. That's not true in the UK. So in the UK, it's illegal to use things like growth hormones to boost either meat or milk production. It is true in the States, and so actually that's something that they need to continue to look at, and maybe some other countries, but it's not true of the UK. And the other thing about hormones, she felt that maybe it was the hormones that the cows naturally produced that put people at an increased risk. But actually, when we've looked into it, the hormones that are produced by cows, whilst they may seem similar to humans, actually don't interact. So they have to follow. It's like having two keys that when you look at them, maybe you look very similar. And if you're like me, I've got a front door and a back door key, and they look virtually identical, and I'm always putting the wrong one into the lock. But you know that it's not the right one, because when you try to turn it, the door doesn't open. And it's like that with bovine hormones. When they try to enter the cells and cause problems, they don't fit into the little locks that we have on our cells, so actually they can't enter. So again, it was another flawed premise. And then the other thing that she spoke about insulin-like growth factors, yes, they are very important in driving certain cancers, because they suppress apoptosis, like we spoke about earlier, telling cells that they need to die. They've ended their natural life cycle. It suppresses that so that you can go on to become bigger, and that's how we grow as we develop as humans as well as animals. So let's have a look and see whether actually that was true. So what they did, based on this, but also because lots of cancer patients were then becoming very scared about dairy, they did a lot of research. And this slide here is based on a combination of over 153 different trials. So it encompasses hundreds and hundreds of thousands of patients, or participants, I should say. They looked at how high their dairy intake was over many years. So they started off looking at a population that didn't have cancer, checked their dairy intake regularly over a process of years, and also whether they went on to develop breast cancer and actually other cancers, not just breast cancer. And they found that there was no evidence that there was any kind of association with incidence with most cancers. But actually, one of the things that was really interesting, and that I like to kind of tell my patients to reassure them, is that particularly with colorectal and breast cancer, not only was there no association, but there was actually a decreased risk with a higher intake of dairy and not. So actually, it's felt to be protective, so it's something that should be included. But when they looked at prostate cancer, they realized that it wasn't the same, and that sometimes the studies showed that if you had more dairy, things like milk, cheese, and dairy calcium, it increased your risk. But actually, if you took whole milk, it reduced your risk. So it's not quite an easy picture to unpick. So they're still doing research on it and trying to really figure out what is going on. But I think the thing that hopefully you can take from this is that you can tell people that it is safe for them to consume dairy if they want to. If they don't, there's lots of alternatives that are out there that they can have, but actually they don't have to avoid it. And if you have breast cancer or colorectal cancer, or that's a risk for you, then actually it might be beneficial to include it. But one of the things that Jane Plant really, I think, missed a bit of a trick on is this next food element, which is soya. So one of the things that really is prevalent in the diet, or kind of highly consumed in the diet of people from China and Japan, is soya. So from an early age, they eat a lot of soy products. And it was interesting for me as a dietitian, because at the beginning of my career, there was a lot of concern about soya and that maybe it increased the risk of breast cancer. But again, it was something where when they did a bit more research, they realized that it was founded on a flawed premise. So when they look at things, before they start to give things to human beings, they do cell trials and animal trials. So they will maybe give things to things like rats or mice who share some common ways of processing things as we do as humans, but it's not 100% the same. So actually what they realized is when they fed rats a diet that was high in soya, they went on to have a higher risk of developing breast cancer. But actually the way that they process it is very different. They then realized when they went to look at the human trials to the way that we process soya. So actually it wasn't a risk. It actually has turned out to be beneficial, which is really useful. So if you look at some of the scientific stuff, it will say things like isoflavones, or which is just the chemical name for the active ingredient in soya. And one of the ways that it works is that for people who where things like estrogen, because it's a type of estrogen, and for breast cancer, if you are very sensitive to estrogen and it drives your breast cancer or your breast cancer risk, the isoflavones actually bind. When we were talking about that lock and key thing earlier, they actually do go into the cells and bind with them. But actually what's really positive is it then stops your own body's estrogens from kind of putting their key into the lock. So actually it then reduces the amount of estrogen you're exposed to, and that's what's beneficial. The other thing that's beneficial is that it has an antioxidant effect, which is useful for protecting your heart. So because some cancer drugs can cause problems with your heart, it's really good to include things in your diet that can help to protect you against it. So basically, that's the real benefit to soy. We also know that it can stimulate apoptosis, so the thing that we spoke about earlier, which is reminding cells when it's their natural time to die and be replaced by healthy new cells. But some of the other stuff that we're starting to learn is that it's really important to have the soya all through your diet, but also particularly between the ages of 15 and 18. So probably for most of us, even though our parents might have tried to get us to eat a lot of soya products, and my mum was one of those, I didn't probably eat nearly as much as, say, somebody who comes from China or Japan. So I probably haven't eaten enough of it to influence my breast cancer risk. But I know that if I increase my intake of it, that it can help to protect my heart. And it's not too late for other people who are younger than me to start to introduce more soya into their diet. And what I'll do is I'll probably stop now and just see if anyone's got any questions, and if not, then I'll keep going or move on to another thing.
Yeah, one question. There was something, oh thank you. There was something you mentioned about, I think it was with the milk, that the way that milk is produced in the United States is different from the way it's produced in this country. Now, does that mean, are there other areas that you can look at? Because quite often, many of the scares, many of the advice that we get comes from the States. Does it necessarily mean that it works the same for us in this country, where we've got different laws, different standards, different methods of production?
Yeah, I think you absolutely have to kind of know where your research is coming from. So as you've said, you know whether because sometimes it's the chemicals that either animals are exposed to or in the production line that can increase your risk rather than the actual product itself. So it makes it really difficult, but yes, you kind of do have to really put your kind of analysing Capon when you look at information to think, where is it coming from? What might be what their drivers, I suppose, for giving you that advice, and what might they be basing it on? So I think you're right. You kind of, even when I was looking at preparing this, I was looking at some of the studies and which were the ones that were looking at a population where they were European, because that's much more kind of common to us than or from the Western world rather than from the Eastern world. So from the Eastern world, yes, there are absolutely things that we can learn, but sometimes the way their bodies work and some of the kind of really kind of fine details of genes and how those genes work can be quite different and can influence your risk. So so it gets very complicated. But the good thing is that there are lots of reputable sites online that you can go for where they have done all that work for you. They've had people, like myself, or doctors or surgeons who've worked in cancer for many, many years, really used to reading all of the kind of literature that's produced and then turning it into something that's really readable for someone who's not from that field, for want of a better word. So kind of sites like Cancer Research UK are really good. In America, Sloan Memorial, they do some really good stuff. The Mayo Clinic does some really good stuff. So I would start there and kind of work your way out. Does anyone else have any questions? No? Okay. Right, I will try and speed up. The only thing about this is I get so enmeshed in it, and there's so much information that I will probably not get to cover everything if I go into it in too much depth. So the next thing is turmeric, and this is probably something that most people have in their cupboards, and it's probably also something that you have hopefully used in your cooking and enjoyed, and it's also something that's kind of entered the kind of health food world, particularly in terms of supplements. So if you go into, like in the UK, we have shops like Holland and Barrett and Superdrug. Those are just English names. If you're watching from abroad, you won't recognise them. And in their kind of vitamin and mineral and other section, there'll be lots of bottles of capsules with turmeric in, and people are taking them for all sorts of different things. And it has also entered the cancer kind of market as well. So I've just kind of put on this slide the name of the active ingredient, which is curcumin, and so that's the thing that really that most people are talking about when they're saying turmeric does this or that. It's this chemical compound in the food that potentially works in the pathways to help either treat or cure or whatever they might be claiming. And we know from looking at it in clinical trials, in laboratories, but also in people, that it does have an antioxidant, an anti-inflammatory, an antimicrobial, so that's kind of antibacteria and antiviral. We all know what viruses are, thanks to COVID. So actually it does have lots of really useful properties. So actually, can this be harnessed in the fight against cancer? So I guess one of the things that I certainly found when I've looked into this for patients is that it's not very easily absorbed, and I have it written down because when I was looking at how it gets into the cells and how much your body kind of filters it out, it was actually quite stunning for me. So, and my maths brain is not amazing, so I did write it down. But one of the reasons why turmeric is exciting, I think, for patients and also for the scientific community and the doctors is because one of the things that they're finding out is that they think that it interacts with the immune mediators. So those are the things, the little signals that go on inside of all our cells that tell them whether to grow, whether to stop growing, whether to divide, whether to take nutrients in, whether to expel things out. But it also signals, as you say, when I'm talking about cell death, one of the things that can happen is if your cells become faulty, which tends to happen as they get older, has nothing against age, but it's just what happens, then if it doesn't die, sometimes it can send out a signal which can tell your white blood cells, this cell is faulty and it should be dead, but it hasn't died, so you need to go and kill it. And so they're called natural killer cells. And if you can kind of put a flag on a faulty cancer cell that activates it, and that activates the natural killer cells and tells them you need to come and gobble this up, get rid of it, then actually you found a really, really useful treatment. So that's one of the reasons I think why people are so excited about it. But actually it's really difficult. It's not very what we call bioavailable. So in terms of getting it into the body and getting it active, it's really difficult to build up a high level of it in the body. So they've done a lot of trials to see what kind of dose can you give by mouth, which then gets into the bloodstream to potentially have its effect. And if you took 8 grams, then by mouth, and then they took samples of your blood and then looked for the curcumin, the active part of it, they found that it came up to less than 2.5 nanograms. And a nanogram is a millionth of a milligram, and a milligram is like a thousandth of a gram. So absolutely minuscule amounts from 8 grams actually then got its way into the bloodstream. So it's really a very difficult thing to build up enough in the bloodstream to see how effective it is at doing its job in terms of potentially stopping or flagging cells to kind of help the immune system get rid of the cancer cells. But actually that's not stopped the medical community, the scientific community, looking at ways to kind of try and change it so that it becomes more available, bioavailable in the body. So we'll see what happens with that. But it's also just reminds me, I've just put a note in my notes to say that when you look at turmeric in the shops, you pick up the capsule and it says like 30,000 milligrams or kind of 200 milligrams per capsule and take 2 capsules a day. You might think, wow, that's a really big dose. If you hadn't just heard that 8 grams only converts to less than 2.5 nanograms in the blood, and 30,000 milligrams is actually not, not close to 8 grams. So just be aware of sometimes the way that things get marketed to kind of make you think you're getting a lot of this, when actually the way it works in the body means it's really, really minuscule. So the thing about any kind of thing that exerts some kind of medicinal property is that it can have side effects, and things like diarrhea can be very common with long-term use. So anybody who's undergone cancer treatment will tell you that often the other drugs that are being given to them give them enough diarrhea and they don't necessarily want any more. So that's something to think about if you're going to advise somebody to start turmeric, or if they tell you, oh, I'm going to start supplementing my diet with curcumin. But having said that, because they are really excited about the potential immune mediators effects, they're starting to do some really early trials. So the stuff that I told you about, the 8 grams converting to less than 2.5 nanograms, that's a really early kind of preclinical trial, what we call, where you're just kind of looking at, if you take this, how much does it convert to? But it's not even looking at its effect once it gets into the bloodstream. And they've now moved on to really small trials to see actually what might help if we can get this into people's bloodstream in a reasonable dose, what can happen. And these early trials have taken place in these cancer groups, which you can see on the slide. And actually there are some kind of useful things starting to come through, which I think I might have put a little bit on my next slide. Yeah. So it may help to suppress what's called tumorigenesis, which is just the way that tumors, or the amount that they're able to grow and divide in 2 types of blood cancers, AML, which is a type of leukemia, and multiple myeloma. And actually also in another type of leukemia, which is in the second one, but it may enhance the effect of anti-cancer drugs. So that's the bit that's kind of got the scientific kind of cancer community really excited. Can you put it together with a cancer drug to make that drug more effective? And in the colorectal group, it was quite a small trial, but they found that it didn't have high level of toxicity. So when they talk about that, it's just how sick does that thing make you when you take it. But 2 people did have significant diarrhea, as we spoke about one of the side effects before, but 2 people had stable disease at 2 months. And that might seem like a really small thing, but actually some medication don't have any effect on things at any month. So the fact that it might potentially be able to keep things stable is really exciting, and so that will go on to have more trials. And then the leukemia trial, there was in CML, chronic myeloid leukemia, they looked at 50 people, and they gave the curcumin alongside imatinib, which is a targeted therapy that kind of helps to kind of kill the cancer cells, and they found that it actually enhanced the effect of it. So they gave some people just ordinary, their usual imatinib treatment, and for some people they gave them curcumin tablets alongside that, and they found that it was helpful. And they've also done trials which are not looking at killing the cancers, but in patients with cancers in their mouth or their throat, they've looked at a curcumin spray to try and help to reduce some of the side effects of the radiotherapy, and that's also had some early promising results. So I think although you can't say to somebody now if they tell you they're going to start taking curcumin that it's going to make any difference, but in the future it might do, and it might be a really, really useful natural product to help the body to recognize the cancer cells and get rid of them. So that's definitely a watch this space for me. I'll be really pleased when the bigger trials come out. And then I'll talk about another one, and then I'll stop again. I don't know if anybody's heard of the kind of acid or alkaline diet. I think as a dietitian, I don't have that many people telling me about diets that they may or may not do, but an alkaline diet I often hear people talking about, even just for people in my general kind of friendship and family circles. And I thought I would just put a slide in that just talks about what they think it is. So for the people who kind of are the proponents of it, they'll say that it can kind of help to maintain health, it can counteract or cure disease, including cancer. So there's that kind of red flag, from right at the beginning in the introduction. Anything that tells you that it can cure cancer as a dietary change, you have to take with a lot of caution. So I looked into this a few years ago when I started to have a few patients come through talking to me about it, and I thought, I don't even really know what it is or how they think it's working, and whether it might be beneficial or actually whether it might be harmful. And it's one of the few diets alongside things like B17, which when they've done really robust clinical studies, it has actually been proven to be harmful because of the fact that the diet is so restrictive that it makes people potentially malnourished, which then means that their cancer treatment doesn't work as well. So then it can then have a really negative impact. But we'll talk a little bit about how it works, or how people say it works. So one of the things that they talk about is, on lots of the websites and in lots of the literature, is that cancer cells kind of produce an acidic environment around themselves, and that's absolutely true. Yes, some of the kind of byproducts of their metabolism, a very common one, something called lactate, which if you've done any running or training, you'll know it's that thing that makes your muscles really burn when you've done a proper workout. And when that gets into the bloodstream, the blood is usually around a pH of 7.4, which is kind of roughly neutral, and the lactate is very acidic and makes the environment around the cancer cell acidic. And so what those people who are kind of touting this diet will say to you is that it can then redress that balance. The tumour kicks out acid. If you have high alkaline diet, it neutralizes it, brings the body back into balance. But is that actually true? So one of the things that I started to look into was, actually, can you even impact the pH of your body with diet? And there are two answers. So for urine, absolutely yes. you can. But for blood, which is where most of the cancers live, no. And that's because the body has some really sensitive, sophisticated, I think for want of a better word, systems. It uses things like the urine to get rid of excess acid and alkaline that your body produces to keep the blood within a really tight, narrow range of pHs. And if it didn't, we would all be dead. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. It absolutely can sense things and trigger lots of different things like chemical buffers, breathing, urine production to keep the pH in the blood within a very kind of tight range. So actually it can't really affect the tumour microenvironment. So there's one thing debunked. And then probably the thing that I would say is that if the person who is kind of the modern day protagonist and proponent of this diet is jailed for 3 years and 8 months because of the lies that he has told about the diet and the things that it can do, then I think you know you're probably not onto the right thing. So this is the guy who, if you go online, lots of people will either refer to him, or he used to have a lot of websites. Hopefully they've mostly been taken down now. And he basically defrauded a lot of people by telling them to either come and stay at his complex that he had, or to get them to go on these cruise ships where they would be subjected to lots of, one, they were expensive, but they'd also be subjected to lots of talks and asked to buy kind of alkalizing products that they would obviously sell to them for a really nice discount to kind of make their body more alkaline and therefore cure any of their diseases. But because it really was based on absolutely no science, he was taken to court and he was found guilty. And as part of his guilty plea, he had to state, and I do have to read it because there were so many things he had to state. If I don't read it, I will forget some things. So he had to state that he had no post-high school education degrees from any accredited schools. So he was calling himself a doctor, but actually he had not got that doctorate from any kind of higher education authority of any rigor, so kind of off the back of a cornflake packet, as I like to say. He could also say, he had to say that he was none of the following. He was not a microbiologist, not a medical doctor, not a hematologist, not even a naturopathic doctor, or even a trained scientist. So actually, really, he was a fraudster who was just peddling something to get people's money when they were in a really vulnerable state. And it was something that could actually make them, unfortunately, more unwell than they already were, but certainly it wouldn't give them any kind of benefit. So if somebody says to you, oh, follow the alkaline diet, you really need to make your body more alkaline, hopefully you have a bit more information to kind of come back at them with. Okay, so I'll take a little stop and see if there are any other questions from people? No, okay. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
There's a couple of questions, actually. One, if we can just go back to the turmeric, to the curcumin. Amazing fact about taking 8 grams, getting it down to, was it 250 nanograms? 2.5. 2.5. Right. Any idea at what point it becomes effective in the body? So, I mean, those figures are kind of, they sound dramatic, but if one doesn't know what's an efficacious dose, yes, it's kind of fairly meaningless. Yeah?
Yeah, and the answer is they don't know yet, so they're starting to... So one of the first things is, can you get it into the bloodstream at all? And then the second thing is, are any of the doses efficacious, or what we call, do they have any clinical benefit? So these kinds of trials are ones where they are testing the doses to see what might be useful. But because they have to first figure out a way of building it up into the bloodstream in a meaningful way, that's the other part of the kind of clinical trials that are taking place. So no, we don't know yet what would be the exact best dose, and there's a potential that it might be different for different types of treatments. that's always another thing that kind of adds in another layer of complexity in terms of saying, if you can get this much in, it converts absolutely to this much, which then has this impact. So it's very, very early, but some of the stuff that they have done has been useful, but it's been where they've had to try and modify the curcumin to make it so that you can get it into the bloodstream in higher concentrations and not cause all of the toxicity like the diarrhea and things. Okay.
The second one, the message I'm kind of getting here overall is just because somebody says it on the internet, it's not necessarily true.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that if I can get to my patients who are going through cancer treatment, that's early enough. That's one of the really big messages that I try to get them to understand. Just because it's been published on a website, it absolutely doesn't mean that it has any kind of credence to it and that it's based on anything robust. So you absolutely, like when lots of people say to me, oh, I've done my own research, and sometimes they'll come to me with like things they've printed from websites and like this much paper and be like, this is what I've used to say that I'm not going to ever eat broccoli again or whatever. Not broccoli, but, to say, but actually when you look through it, it's just lots of different websites where people have posted their opinions or they've taken it from flawed hypotheses or kind of a thing that might work in a lab that then doesn't work when you take it into human trials, when you give it to people. Because if you could just treat cancer in a Petri dish, a little glass dish, you could absolutely eradicate it, because there are lots of things that if you kind of you can get a cancer cell and drop a liquid of anything onto it, it will kill it. But whether you can actually then replicate that in the human body with all its complex systems designed to filter things out, to kind of, can you even get it into the organ that the cancer is lodged in? All of those things often mean that things that seem really interesting in the labs don't make it into any kind of cancer treatment or dietary treatment. So that's the other thing about reading things in the newspaper as well. Sometimes they'll put a really juicy story in of like, this cures cancer, or this causes cancer, or this will kill you in 10 days. And often it's based on kind of either clinical studies of things in a test tube or in animals. And although we do lots of early trials in things like rats and other animals, but we have to remember they are not humans. So it's just a thing that helps us to understand whether it's safe enough to even give it to a human, and then you do the human trials to see, do we have enough of the same compatibility in the way that our system works to see whether this thing will be helpful. And any other questions? Oh, yeah. Oh, do you want to? Oh, thank you. I've got a very helpful young man. I'll give you mine. Oh?
It's on.
Yeah. Just hold it a bit closer.
Yeah, maybe as a dietitian, you may have an answer, because I've noticed some of the fruits, vegetables, and chicken you see in the market. When you see the organic ones, they may look smaller in size.
Yes.
But when you see the GM ones, they look big, so big. So is there anything that they add to the GM ones that made them so fat, big like that? For example, you see this bell pepper. There are some that are really big, and ginger. When you see the organic ginger is very tiny, and when you see the GM one is very big. So when you eat those things that are GM modified, we can see it that something is really, really not right there. And when we consume those things, is there no way that those things that make them fat, is there no way that we are also eating putting those things inside our bodies? Are they not the things that are causing all these cancers?
Okay, so I will probably tackle it on two things. So I will challenge you on your use of the phrase GM, which means genetically modified. So in the UK, there are very strict laws against any kind of genetically modified products. So although they are used quite extensively in the States and in other countries, because the British public was so against genetically modified things, they are not in our food chain. So that's one thing.
But what do you think that make those food bigger than the
absolutely.
organic ones?
I just wanted to put that there, just so that was the first bit. The second bit is there are probably 2 or 3 different reasons why. So, say for example with meat, so you said to me like your organic chicken often looks much smaller than your kind of ordinarily maybe factory or whatever produced one. And there could be 2 reasons. So one, often they will inject water into the meat to make it heavier, because often they sell it by weight. So they want it to be heavier, so it's more expensive. And so then you may notice when you cook it, a lot of water comes out, because that's the water that was in there, but it comes out as you cook it. So that's one thing that sometimes happens. The second thing is, some people that in your kind of commercial or your ordinarily produced, your traditionally produced things rather than your organic thing, they might choose a breed of chicken that is bigger. So it's so, like with dogs, not that we eat dogs, but I'm just using them as an example. There are some very small dogs. It doesn't matter how much you feed them, they're always going to be small. And there are some very big dogs, so they're going to get big. So often you'll find that the people who produce kind of your mass-produced non-organic stuff will choose a type of chicken that grows bigger but also grows faster. And with your organic produce, it's going to be usually free range, so running around and kind of burning up energy. And with your kind of your mass-produced stuff, they're often kept in much smaller, kind of maybe big sheds where they don't have very much space to move around, maybe not even really walking very much. So they're not burning off that energy by exercising, so they get fatter much quicker, and they often have more fat in their meat and under their skin than your organic stuff. So that's often why there's a size difference between the two. Your organic stuff is allowed to kind of roam to a certain degree, maybe not as much even as they like to say, but they're allowed to roam free. They tend to choose slower growing varieties, for want of a better word. A chicken that takes a lot longer to go from a chick to a fully mature chicken, which would then be sent to be culled and then put into the food chain. And they exercise, they burn off their calories more. Does that help?
Yeah, there's another thing. In developing world countries, when I was there, I can remember like something like egg. If you keep egg for some time, it gets rotten. But here, if I keep egg for 1 year, it's still the same. So what is it that is inside the egg? Is it because of the weather condition or what? Because it's hotter there, or why is it like that?
Yes, it may be the conditions that they're kept in, but what we tend to find, certainly for the eggs that are produced in the UK, whether they are ones that you buy from the supermarket or whether it's a chicken that belongs to your friend. I have some friends who keep chickens and they do sometimes give me their eggs, is that the way that they spoil on the whole tends to be that they lose water through their shells, so the eggs become lighter and drier. So if you get a really fresh egg, when you crack it, it's often got 2 whites and a yolk, so very firm. And then as it gets older and it loses water through its shell, because the shell is porous, then it becomes kind of more of a runny egg. So when you crack it, it might spread out further. The white will probably just be 1 white and will be quite loose, and the yolk might be quite loose as well. If you're like me and you have an egg languishing in your fridge for a couple of months and then you go to throw it away and the shell cracks, it's often very dry inside, and it hasn't spoiled. It's not necessarily, had any mold or anything in it because of the way that the shell works to kind of keep things out from the outside coming in, but it doesn't stop that diffusion of water from the inside of the egg out. So you end up just with a very, very dry thing, maybe that sometimes doesn't have any liquid. Not convinced. I have to say, I've not come across anywhere I think you're right, sometimes they can, but I have to say, my own personal experience, I've not ever cracked an egg and had it come out rotten, when you smell it. That happens very...
Yes, eggs do spoil, because it happened to me just a couple of weeks ago, is that when I go to crack the egg, it's good thing before I don't mix all together, because that is how I train. You crack one side, then when you check and it is good, you mix the rest. And I crack an egg, and by the time I look at it, it was black and runny.
Wow, see, I think even the lady behind you is saying she's never seen that. So I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but it's not very common. And I also do the same thing, having trained in home ec. Always taught to crack the egg separately into another container, and then when you see that it's good, you pop it in with the rest. So that's a very, very sensible tip. Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, there are 2 questions here. I think I got myself caught up in something else. I think you said something about skin disorder. Do you remember that?
That was with turmeric. It's one of the side effects of long-term high use of curcumin.
Okay, so the person wants to know what skin disorder.
So often it's usually just either irritation or discoloration. So it might make you look more yellow.
Oh, yellow, right.
Which can also happen if you overdose on vitamin A, which is also very interesting.
I'm looking on my skin at the moment because I do cook with turmeric sometimes.
Hopefully even you're not taking in that much pasta every day.
Yeah. Right, okay, turmeric supplement, and is it teas? Are they effective in terms of absorption into the body, or should we just stick to cooking with it? How much is sufficient to consume? That's another question online.
Okay, so curcumin is very difficult to absorb into the body regardless of how you take it, whether you take it as a tea or whether you take it as a spice in your cooking. So there's not necessarily a good way to get it in. So you can have it in any form that you like, but I wouldn't necessarily take it as a medicine because it's very difficult to get into the body, and we don't necessarily know what is the best dose to take to get the beneficial effect. They're still trying to figure that out. So hopefully the next time I come and give this talk, I'll be able to say what the other results are. Okay, I think, have I got like 5 more minutes?
Earlier you spoke about GM, which is genetically modified something. Yes, what you said about it is it's not legal in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. So so things that happen here, is it because they import it, or is it because think about grapes when there's no seeds in it?
So that is slightly different. So that is when the grapes are forming, they put a chemical on it that stops the seeds from developing. So actually the seeds are still in there. So if you eat a seedless grape, you'll see like sometimes a little green thing in there, which is very soft, and that is the immature seed where they've found a way of developing it. So, or a
So
chemical.
is that not
stops it.
genetically
No.
GM?
No. So that's a chemical that has stopped the development of those seeds. A genetically modified thing is where you insert a bit of genetic code into the seed so that it develops in a specific way.
Okay.
So one of the things that they use it for a lot in the States is to make the crops more resistant to pesticides. And so by doing that, it means that they can use higher levels of pesticides to eradicate the weeds, but not damage the crop. So that's an example of a genetically modified plant.
I would say concerning the genetic modify, that you say that is not thing in the country, in this country. I'm not a big farmer. I'm a small farmer. I have an allotment. Now, when you buy the seeds and you plant the seeds, from the seeds that they are genetic. So the fruits are genetic.
So yes, everything is genetic. Human beings are genetic. We all have genes.
So I'm saying that the plants or the fruits, the food that we are genetically modified.
So not in the UK. So sorry, the lady was saying that as an allotmenteer, she has and plants different seeds. So she feels that yes, some of them are genetically modified. Have I understood that correctly?
What I'm saying, when you buy the seeds and you plant them, the seeds are already being genetic. So when you plant the seeds and you reap the crop, they are already genetic. Now, when you plant and then you make your own seed from the plant that you have, those are not genetic.
So everything has a gene. Your gene is what determines what you are. So you have a genetic code that makes a seed for sweet corn. You have a genetic code that makes a human being. So the genes are just the very basic structure of a cell that tells it what to turn into. And there are different techniques for getting different things, because probably as a allotmenteer, you know that there are often different strains of vegetables and fruits coming out each year, and that if you find that a certain type of seed is naturally resistant maybe to adverse, to things like blight, potato blight, you might then use that as your seed potato for the next generation. Well, not you personally, but that's how often people who work in the agriculture industry will do if they notice that something has... Yeah, so they have looked at strains that are more resistant to things like tomato blight, and then they have exclusively focused on developing and producing those seeds so that they have a bigger crop that's resistant to a disease, rather than altering its genetic structure. So those are natural variations that happen in the plant, and you notice it, and then you selectively breed it, which is different because it's a naturally occurring thing, rather than you inserting a gene from something into something else to make it do or not do something, which might feel like semantics, but actually, you might say have a tulip, and you plant the tulip or lots of tulip bulbs, and you notice that one has slightly different colouring that's more pleasing to the eye. So you actually use that to create more tulip bulbs that look the same as that, rather than just always having a random kind of variation of different colours with your tulips. You can actually do that, and it's not modifying it. It's just choosing things that naturally have that property to them. It could be possible. That's it. I feel like I won you over. Yeah, I think,
It could be possible.
it could be possible. And I'm not saying that there aren't genetically modified foods out there, but at the moment they're not in our food chain. But if you go to other countries, they may be in there. So that's the thing about being very wise and looking to see what is happening to the things that are going into your body. Okay. Yeah? I can call it a day.
Thank you. I think there was a question concerning, I think the mic just went, it's back, concerning like famine relief. So essentially, why do those young children we see on television have protruding bellies, even though they haven't been eating anything?
Okay.
So that was just a question.
So it's actually to do with a lack of protein in their diet, and they've so it's called protein energy malnutrition. And basically, what happens is because they are so starved of nutrients and the protein levels get very low, it causes the fluid that would usually just stay in your bloodstream to come out. And you see it with them coming out into their abdomen and building up. So that's why then what we call refeeding, so when you feed them again, very, very cautiously and with very, very specific products, and use oral rehydration solutions, you can then reverse that. But it's not that they're getting fat, it's just an accumulation of fluid in the wrong space. Okay. Lovely, thank you so much. It's always really useful and lovely to speak with people and to try and answer some of their questions. And there's another section which, if I come back another time, I can talk to you about sugar and does it or doesn't feed cancer, which I'm sure everybody has their own views on, and I've got some extra information, but I'll save that for another time. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. She said I need to come again for those who didn't hear her.
I'm going to invite you again. Right. So we did something on the kidney, right? We did something on high blood pressure, and now you're being taught how to eat, right? Is it? Right. Okay. Not how to eat, but how to select what you eat. I thought it was the same thing. Right. How to be more selective. Shall we give Sister Natalie a thank you? And would you like her to come back again? So I might try and bait her to come back next month. Yes, it's hard to get Natalie, but so thank you very much. We really appreciate the information that you have given to us. And I think, having listened, then we need to take on board all the points that have been made. And I think the point that Sister Desiree made, that the fact that some things are more resistant doesn't mean that it is GM. And I think that is important, because when you plant in your allotment, the seeds that they give you, there's some seeds that are resistant to pests. It doesn't mean that they're genetically modified. They will have to play with the code that seed that has. They would have to mess with the seed. So the fact that something is, like we had a lot of coconut tree in the West Indies, right? Yeah, and you notice there was a certain disease that just went through, and a lot of them died out, but some of them stayed. So they will investigate why were these ones more resistant. Yeah, and so what they then did, they started to reproduce the ones that withstood these attacks. And then they plant them right across the country. So if they're going to give you a seed to plant for the coconut, they'll give you the seed from this particular strain. They'll give you the seed from that. That's not genetically modified. It's a natural, but it's just that it resists. So for example, they're doing a research like, okay, for some people are around people who have COVID, yes, and they never get it. So now they're doing a research on those individuals as to why they were in direct contact with individuals who had COVID, and they slept on the same bed, they used the same everything, and they never got it. So they're wondering, what is it about this individual? I know there's a research going on, isn't it? And then if they realize what is it, then they said, oh, right, so this is what everybody else needs to do so as to avoid it, something like that.
They can use that then to potentially predict who's going to get sick and who might need to shield or who might need medication and who wouldn't. So there's lots of different ways, but yeah, people sometimes have a natural immunity because of how they've grown up or or because there's a slight difference in their genetic code, which means that they respond differently, or they've been exposed to different viruses as they've been growing up that's given them a natural immunity. So then you can figure out what's going on. Sometimes you can replicate it, sometimes you can't, but at least you know then who your high-risk people are that you need to protect and who you can send out to do whatever it is you need to do to keep the country going.
That's why she's who she said, I'm a pastor. The technical thing, just speak it technical. So thank you again, and I'm sure you will come back, yeah? All right, thank you. Right, so let's do a closing prayer. And we have another 20 minutes just to settle ourselves. We'll then have a short devotion, and then we will then go into our business meeting. All right? I hope we won't be going on forever, all right, with the business meeting. I'm hoping the agenda is very short, all right? And it's going to be dependent on those of you who are here, all right? So I have an agenda, and we can make a presentation that way. Where's George? Come on. Right, come give us a prayer. I'm training this young man up, so if I call him to pray, that's what I'm doing. All right, come on.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the people for coming here, and thank you for the people for listening, and when there's the lady's preaching and very well, and thank you for the people for understanding what she's talking about, and thank you for Lord for coming here safely in Jesus' precious name, amen.
Thank you. And he's going to, you notice he's behaving himself nicely because he wants to be the next pastor for this church. So that's good. Thanks, Jordan. Right. So take yourself for a bit of a refresh, and we come back at 5:30. I have 4 things on the agenda. I'm sure you